All right, so this is my Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley Part 2 recap. Jake Paul gets it done in the sixth, in the against Tyron Woodley in this rematch. And I will mention the fact that Tyron Woodley did take this fight on short notice, so I'm going to show him the proper respect that he deserves in terms of taking this fight on short notice. Specifically, what was it, 11 days notice that Tyron Woodley took this fight on? So props to him, right? Props to him. I'm not going to beat a man down when kick a man while he's down, is the saying, right? I'm not going to do that. That's just not cool. But what I will do is kind of give you my thoughts on this fight and give you my take on Jake Paul, the state of Jake Paul's boxing career, and who I feel should be next for Jake Paul. So let's get right to it. Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley Part 2. As I mentioned, Tyron Woodley taking the fight on short notice. But Jake Paul, what did I see from Jake Paul round by round by round? I did see a fighter that did improve from the last fight. Did I see a quality boxer? I can't say that because as of this very minute, Jake Paul still has not done what I wanted him to do, and that's fight a boxer. Box a boxer in a boxing match. It hasn't happened yet. Jake Paul fought a YouTuber. Jake Paul fought Nate Robinson. Jake Paul fought Van Askren. And Jake Paul fought Tyron Woodley not once but twice. But I can pay respect and pay homage to the fact that Jake Paul did knock out a former 5-time UFC welterweight champion. Welterweight, 170 pounds. Jake Paul walks around at 190. So 20-pound weight difference there for Jake Paul. I'm sure Jake Paul gained some weight in the meantime from the weight cut, weighing in to the fight. Maybe weighed as much as 200 pounds, 205 pounds. Who knows? Tyron Woodley is generally a bigger guy. He cut a lot of weight to get down to 170. But physically, Tyron Woodley didn't look like he was in great shape, but he did look like he was ready to fight. And those are two very different things. Physically, Woodley didn't look like he was in the best physical shape, didn't have the pronounced abs, didn't have the biggest muscles in this fight. His legs didn't look as muscular as they normally do or as they have throughout his MMA career, but he did look like he was in shape enough to fight. He did look like he was coming to fight, and he did do what he set out to do. What he set out to do was pressure Jake Paul, initiate a clinch, wear Jake Paul down, and tire him out. And that did work. As far as Tyron Woodley's game plan, brilliant. It worked. Jake Paul went through some adversity. He suffered a headbutt cut right on, I believe, this side of his forehead right here, the right side of his forehead from Tyron Woodley. And, the blood was pouring into his eye from his forehead. The cut men did a great job at not closing the cut, but putting enough Vaseline on the cut that you didn't see it open back up again. You didn't see the blood pour from his forehead into his eye. And that's a moment where you can tip your cap to Jake Paul, where we saw a fighter fighting in a fight, battling adversity in a boxing ring. That's what we saw. A fighter, someone fighting in a boxing ring, battling adversity. We didn't see a boxer in there. We didn't see a boxer winning a boxing match against a boxer. We saw a fighter in there with an MMA fighter in a boxing ring, in a boxing match. But we didn't see boxing. We didn't see quality boxing really from either men once again in this fight. I've watched thousands of fights. I know the difference between quality boxing and not. And there were many rounds in this fight where we didn't see the best boxing, but we did see improved boxing from Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley in comparison to their first fight. Very big difference in those little tweaks there to the sentences that I just stated. But nonetheless, a 5-time former UFC champion was knocked out by a 24-year-old aspiring boxer. And I give Jake Paul credit for the knockout 100%. The setup was beautiful. The setup was a setup that if Jake Paul was boxing a boxer would not fall flat on their face to that type of setup. Something that an experienced boxer would take note of, envision that setup playing itself out in the way that Jake Paul actually set up that setup. Yeah, set up that setup. It was set up by Jake Paul round after round after round. If you watch the fight closely, there were different moments of the fight where Jake Paul moved one way, Tyron Woodley would move that way too, follow suit. it was only a matter of time before Jake Paul moved one way and then forced Tyron to move that way, and Paul threw a completely different technique than what Woodley was expecting, and that's what we saw in the 6th round, leading to that knockout victory. But as fight fans, we always wonder what's next. We always wonder, okay, after a fight's over, who's next for that fighter and why? And as a fight fan, as a diehard fight fan, as a hardcore fight fan, I always live by the adage and the verbiage that I want what was offered to me. If a fight falls through and another fighter steps in and that fight happens, I'll watch it. But when that fight's over, I go back and I say to myself, okay, well, now I want what was offered to me. What was offered to us and what should be next for Jake Paul was what was given to us, and that was Tommy Fury. What was originally given to us was Paul versus Fury, Jake Paul versus the little brother of world heavyweight champion Tyson Fury, and that is a fight that I could respect. That is a fight that I can hunker down and say, yeah, I'll buy that, because that's a true boxing match featuring a fighter that wants to be taken, to what I think, taken more seriously as a boxer, versus a guy that has trained in boxing since he was a little kid. I can respect that. But to what I said just moments ago, does Jake Paul want to be taken more seriously by the boxing audience? And in actuality, does Jake Paul want the boxing audience? I don't know the answer to that question, which leads me to believe, as of now, no, Jake Paul does not want the boxing audience. Jake Paul just wants, Jake Paul just wants what he wants. These older MMA fighters that have accrued a ton of damage over the course of their career. The Nate Diaz's of the world, the Jorge Masvidal's of the world. These are fighters that are on the wrong side of 30. These are fighters that have suffered damage from 4-ounce gloves, that have taken head kicks, had their head knocked off their shoulders, that have been choked unconscious, that have been knocked out cold. In the case of Jorge Masvidal in his last fight versus Kamaru Usman for the UFC welterweight title. Jake Paul knows that. They know that. And once again, it's an opportunity for Jake Paul to fight a fighter that is not a boxer. Jorge Masvidal is no more of a boxer than Jake Paul. Nate Diaz is no more of a boxer than Jake Paul. And I say that not in terms of the training that they have accrued over the course of their career. They've trained boxing longer than Jake Paul, but the form of boxing they have trained for is different than the boxing form that Jake Paul is training in. Regardless of the boxing gloves being put on, the fighters stepping into the ring to train boxing, they're training boxing to use that as a setup towards a takedown. They're training boxing and striking to use it as a setup towards a clinch. Jake Paul is not. Jake Paul is training pure boxing to purely box. There's a big difference. I truly feel that in order for Paul to really take himself seriously, that's the biggest next step of Jake Paul's career. If Jake Paul wants to be taken seriously as a boxer, he has to take this career seriously, because I think he does have talent. I do see an improvement. Obviously improved from his last fight to this fight. Fought Woodley to a split decision the first time. Fights him via knockout to a knockout the second time. Jake Paul is improving, but does he want the boxing audience? It was a hell of a knockout, a great setup. You had my curiosity. Now you have my attention. And Jake Paul, it's on you. Who do you want next? Do you want to be taken seriously and fight Tommy Fury, or do you want just the MMA eyeballs on your fights by fighting Jorge Masvidal or Nate Diaz? I'm not really running to the front of the line to watch a boxing match between a fighter that wants to be taken seriously as a boxer while fighting people who aren't boxers. On the flip side of that, I'm a that is long in the tooth, that has taken damage fighting in a boxing ring. I think we've seen enough of that from Jake Paul. It's time to shift gears and take yourself seriously. I'm Ryan Thomas. It was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley II recap. Hope you enjoyed it.